Welcome to Behind the Curtain with Rob Scanland and Dan Skinkis. This is Season 1, Episode 9.
Hello and welcome to this edition of The Christian Journey, Look Behind the Curtain. I'm Rob Scanland. This is my good friend and Christian brother Dan Skinkis. The purpose for this series is for Dan and I to share some of our experiences from our walk in faith and to encourage you to think and reflect on your own journey. We're delighted and honored to have you sharing a little bit of time with us today. So the topic for today's discussion is the dark night of the soul, or when God, you feel, has left you. And I want to start by reading a couple of things from the Bible that I think talk about that experience of having the dark night of the soul. So the first is from Job 30. I cry out to you, God, but you do not answer. When I hoped for good, evil came. When I looked for light, then came darkness. And from Psalms, you have put me in the lowest pit, in the darkest depths. Why, Lord, do you reject me and hide your face from me? You have taken from me friend and neighbor. Darkness is my closest friend. Wow. And then from Lamentations, he has driven me away and made me walk in darkness rather than lights. He has made me dwell in darkness like those long dead. And even Jesus experienced the dark night when on the cross he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? So those are some examples of kind of what the dark night is. But the actual kind of coining of that term, which was in Spanish, it was actually an 8-stanza poem written by a guy by the name of St. John of the Cross. And he was a 16th century Spanish Carmelite monk. And he was imprisoned. And through the trials of his imprisonment, he came face to face with the disruptive and consuming disorientation of spiritual darkness. He speaks of a secret stairway by which one descends into a painful period of deprivation, which appears to be deep and seemingly bottomless. And then here are some other things that people who have experienced the dark night of the soul have talked about. And in one way, the soul's journey into a more intimate union with God is what this dark night represents. It represents a spiritual crisis that leads us from profound unknowing to radiant transformation, a time when all coping mechanisms fail and we are faced with God's liberation or death. And yet in the darkness, the experience gives a full hope and promise of God's illumination and rescue. It is often a time of testing, of suffering and agony, if not always accompanied by a feeling of being lost, confused, fearful, endless waiting, uncertainty, pain, despair, doubts of God's presence, abandonment, and complete helplessness, which I think we've all been there, unfortunately. So 4 of the kind of phases, for lack of a better word, for this experience of the dark night of the soul, and these are in no particular order, but they include an encounter with the truth, an adjustment of your faith, a trust awakening, and then a belief or reckoning with God's holy word and presence. The dark night of the soul is an awakening to the awful truth. God is in control no matter what we do, say, or think. It is when everything we try fails and we are left at confronting God and his mercy to save, heal, or transform, literally to pull us out of this dark and frightening pit of despair and helplessness. Our prayers, which I know we have all prayed, are, how long must I wait, Lord? Why don't you help me? Where are you, Lord? Why have you turned against me? We must come to the dreadful truth that no amount of our effort, trying harder, coping, faith speaking, broken cisterns, fixing, pleading, anything apart from God will rescue us from our torment. You ever had one of those experiences, Dan?
Yeah, I think I have.
I think I have, yeah. That may not be, I mean, I think we all probably have experienced them to differing degrees.
Correct.
So,
Yeah. I think of David and David, what he went through and crying out for mercy constantly, and then Paul recognizing the fact what he did, and those men of the Bible. And so, and I'm surely not walking in the parallel in their strength and power as they were in those different situations. But I do know one thing about it is that I backslid a lot, and that's a term we use in Christianity, but all it means is you just go back to your old ways and sort of walk away from God. And, in my life, God, the father of my life, that spiritual father, who I fell in love with early on, and I know he was in love with me because he called me while I was still in my sin. I thought I could put one foot in the road, on one side of the road and one on his side of the road.
Okay.
And God isn't the God that's going to come and condemn you and change your choices. Those choices are all your own, and you grow through them. And I want to just pinpoint the closest I came to, I felt spiritual death and detachment from God, and my father walked away from me and said, that's enough. And previous to that, there were many encounters that, well, if I do this, and you forgave me before, I think you'll forgive me for this one. And they kept getting worse. They progressively and my soul became tainted with that thing that I thought, I could get away with it and I still love God. Well, the day of reckoning came after long bouts with partying and alcohol and running crazy and wild. I'll never forget, I was sitting in my condominium. I was working up at the MGM Grand, and I felt this total detachment from God.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, and I never felt the fear, the emptiness, all of that was gone, that feeling of, and I told God, I said, you finally walked away from me, and I understand it, Lord. But I'd rather go to hell saying your name than be on this earth and proclaiming you in bar rooms like I have been doing and walking this halfway walk with you. And I said, I know you're gone. And then the voice. And I always say the voice because I heard the voice. And the voice says to me, I'm just going to take... Sorry. I'm just going to take a walk around the block. Because God never leaves you. But I'll tell you one thing. This is how far away you can get from God. And I felt that presence leave me totally.
Wow.
Totally. I felt that the world as it perceives God, He's in this world, so it gives us hope, it gives us love, it gives us all those spiritual things. But when that's all gone, you are a void of nothing. You don't hardly exist within yourself. I cried out. I cried out, Lord, please. Please, I'll walk the walk. I will walk the walk. I know you heard it before. And I heard these words, my grace is sufficient for you this time.
Wow.
I've taken the pain and suffering away from you numerous times. My grace is sufficient for you this time. And I felt that emptiness and loneliness, and all of a sudden, wow, God's back.
So that was a new place of intimacy that had never been there before.
Correct.
Wow.
It
that is
was,
incredible.
we may cry out for God, we may make our amends, and we may go to God for pardon, and we're in sorrow, and he comes to us. But when he wants to deal with you,
Wow.
that's a different thing.
Yeah.
That's the spanking,
Yeah.
the God spanking. And I don't think there's any human being that ever wants that spanking, but somehow we get there. And when I was in the Salvation Army treatment plants, I saw Dans all over the place. Men that knew Christ, men that walked with Christ, men that backslid in Christ, and with the same story. And when they came back after that spanking, they never wavered at all. They stayed where they were supposed to stay with God.
Thank you for watching Behind the Curtain with Rob Scanland and Dan Skinkis. This program is a Presbypod production of Aunt Betty Studios, a ministry of First Presbyterian Church, Carson City.